Check out what I can do. Want to learn how to build a tool just like this? Stick around for the rest of the video. Well, let me give you an overview of what the project is in its entirety. So what we're doing here is we're generating a VS Code extension that allows a user to be able to highlight a piece of code. So this could be a full method, or it could be a code snippet, and generate a summary using a deep learning model that has already been trained. If you want to learn more about how to train a deep learning model to actually generate this code, look in the description of this video for a written tutorial that goes step by step for how I went about training the model that you'll be using throughout this tutorial. If you want to build a new one for a different language, or you just want to have the experience of building your own and training your own. So this project is going to first start off with us scaffolding the extension for VS Code. So in order to do that, we're going to be following this Visual Studio's tutorial on building your first extension. And the programming language that we're going to be using is JavaScript for this particular part, since that's what VS Code requires. Then we're going to be moving into some Python code, which is going to set up loading the trained model that we have already trained here, and then taking as input a particular method and generating the summary of that method using the trained model, and creating an API out of this using FastAPI. See here. And then we're using ngrok, which is a really cool way of generating a IP address from a particular server that gets routed and all fancy stuff that I have no clue how it works. If you want, I would go read their documentation for how all that's done. And using this FastAPI library, which is amazing for actually generating the backend server that allows us to send an HTTP request from the Visual Studio extension to the server that has our model running, that will compute the summary and then send back a response to the VS Code extension with the summary of the method that we care about. So let's go ahead and just start off with the first thing. So let's get the extension up and running, where we can essentially just send an HTTP request after we've highlighted a piece of code. So first, we're going to just follow this tutorial exactly. We're going to be going step by step. So Ooh, that is not being fun for. That's not being nice to me. And now I believe I've already installed this previously, so this hopefully will go by a lot quicker than it might for you. But just sit back, relax, grab some coffee, and enjoy the show while it downloads for you. Looking like this is taking some time, so I'm probably going to be fast forwarding through this part. So if you get an error like I just got here, it just means that you didn't have access to load in from this particular, didn't have access to write to this particular directory. So in order to get rid of that, all you have to do is add a sudo. So go ahead and do a sudo nlp install, and this should take care of that error. So I'll go ahead and jump ahead to once I've installed this. Okay, so the tool successfully installed. So let's go ahead and run the command that's next in the Visual Studio Code tutorial. So that's yo code, and it's going to prompt us with a couple of questions. So we're going to be doing a new extension, and we're going to be using TypeScript. Let's call this one code commenter. let's just leave it as default, like they say to automatically generate code comments using deeplearning. Let's go ahead and initialize it. No. Let's go ahead and use npm. Like it's going to be installing some dependencies and stuff and generating the file structure for us. Awesome. So now all we have to do is go into this directory and launch VS Code. So we now have our initial extension written out for us with all the necessary packages and all that stuff. So let's go ahead and start writing. So the first thing that we're going to be doing, if I can bring over my notes, I'm going to. All right, so let's first test to make sure everything's working. So I'm going to press F5, which basically launches the Visual Studio extension in debug mode. You see here I already have a test Java file for when we start working with Java files, which it was made by one of my friends when I was in undergrad, and this is a perfect example because he forgot to leave comments. So this will greatly help. This will be able to automatically add comments here once we add those commands. So let's go ahead and open up our command prompt because that's what the entry point into our first VS Code extension was built to do. So if we type in hello world, we have this new command that we can run. And all it does is it prints hello world from our extension. So let's see how it does that. So if we open up the package.json file, we can see that there are a couple important things such as the name of our extension, the description, the version, etc. The one that we care about is this contributions one. So we can see here it has a commands where the command is a particular entry point into the actual source code. You can see is actually here, where we register a command called command commenter.hello world, and then it's going to activate the code in here when this gets called. And the way that this gets called is that it's being posted to the command palette list of commands. So we're essentially appending a new command into the user's list of commands in their command palette called hello world. So we're going to edit this so that we can just highlight our code, right click and say run, summarize highlighted code. In order to add a menu like that, similar to like run script or change all occurrences and stuff, what we're going to do is we're going to write a new contributes, and it's going to be called menus. So we're going to be editing this. And specifically, we're going to say that this is an editor/context menu. And we're going to say that when should this be available to the user? Well, it should be available to them when the editor that they're using, so VS Code, has something selected. So it has a selection, and the command that we're going to say is going to be code commenter hello world. Just for now, we'll change the name later. And it's going to be in the group. So when you right click, you can see how they have different groups of commands here. So all of these are in one command, all of these are in another group. So the group that we're going to place the summarized code is going to be in the same one as cut, copy, paste, since it's similar to those types of actions. So I'm going to say that this is in group 9, cut, copy, paste. Okay, so let's go ahead and restart our debug. Let's go back to it. And we should now be able to right click, and we can now see hello world is now an option where it wasn't before. We go ahead and click it, it executes that command. Awesome. So this seems to be going well. Let's now try and grab the user's selection, so whatever they highlighted, and print it out to the screen. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and go into the extensions.ts file, which is in the source directory, and we're going to be editing code here. So in order to grab that, a couple things that we're going to do is first we're going to go ahead, give us some space. So first we're going to grab the editor, since this editor object is what contains all the fancy features like grabbing what the user has selected and stuff like that. We're going to say const editor is equal to the VS Code object.window active text editor. So this is just getting that object. Active text editor. So this is just grabbing the object that the user currently has open where they're writing their code. And we're going to just make sure that that editor exists, so the person has it open. And if it doesn't exist, we'll just return empty. So this is like doesn't open. Unlikely that this is going to occur, but this is just a nice safety check that we can do. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the document that they are on, editor.document, and then we're going to grab their selection. So the selection is just the actual portion, like the line numbers and everything that they have highlighted. The document is actually the thing that actually contains things like the text that they have written. And so in order to get that text, we can do something like this. So just do let code equal document get text. And we're going to pass it the selection. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to send this off to the message box instead of that hello message. Let's go ahead and restart our application. See if that's working for us. Okay, so it looks like it worked. We now have the text that was highlighted now being printed out to the screen. So if they wanted to highlight a different portion, and we'll also get that. Awesome. So now this is pretty simple. We're almost there, and all we have to do is now get it into a format that the model knows how to handle, and then write an HTTP post request that will send it to the server that's going to be hosting the model, that will take the method and translate it into the summarized version and send it back to us. Okay, so let's implement now sending the HTTP command. Well, first, let's do a bit of cleanup on this code because the code actually expects to be in a certain format. So the model was actually trained to not have to be in all lowercase, so it expects the method coming into it to be in all lowercase, and also to not have any special white space, so things like tabs and stuff. So we're going to be only using the space separator to separate pieces of the code. And so I'm just going to copy and paste the command that I use to generate that. So I'll walk you through really quickly what that does. So all this is doing is it's taking the code that the user highlighted, it's splitting it by the white space. So this could be actual spaces, or it could be tabs as well. So it's splitting it based off of those. Then it's just rejoining those back with just spaces. So it's essentially taking out all tabs and stuff and only replacing them with spaces. It's also removing multiple spaces with one single space. And then we're just lowering everything to lowercase. Okay. So let's now send an HTTP request. So in order to do that, what we're going to be using is Axios. So let's go ahead and install this library. This is just another library that you can use with NPM. So we're just going to be doing npm dash, I believe it's I-S. So I stands for install, dash S stands for save. And so it's basically saving that we're going to have Axios as a dependency. Sure that I did this correctly. Okay, so it added Axios to our dependencies here. As our dependency. So now all we have to do is import Axios. Import Axios from Axios. And now what we're going to do is send a post request, because our when you're sending data across the web, one thing that you usually do if you want to send data to a server is you use a post request. If you want to learn more about the different ways, like the different HTTP protocols for sending data and receiving data, I'm sure you could find on Google or YouTube a nice tutorial that talks you through all that stuff. So we're going to do axios.post. We then have to give it a URL. So right now I'm going to leave that blank. And then we have whatever the data is that we want. So in JSON format. So in JSON format, it's basically like a dictionary. So the key is going to be called code, and the actual data is going to be this data, this code here. And then we also need to pass in the headers. So this headers is the type of, it's basically metadata about the type of post request data that you're sending. So headers, say that this is the content type for this post request data is going to be JSON data. I wouldn't worry too much about all this stuff. This is just things that you have to do, sadly, in order to get everything working. It has to be wrapped. That. Okay. So we're going to send this request off, and then we want to figure out, then we want to wait for a response. So in order to wait for a response with Axios, we're going to do .event, which will take in a function that takes in a response and execute some code based on that response. So for now, what we're going to do is we're going to just show the window. We're going to move this here. We're going to essentially take the response and .data. So whatever data that we're receiving back from the server, and we're going to show it as a message box for a user. Okay, so that's pretty much it. In order for us to get the most simplest case where we are able to summarize a method. So let's go ahead and jump into the backend. So I'm not going to go into depth each of these pieces. I'm going to be providing a link in the description to this notebook where you can run it yourself and look through it. And of course, if you want to have a more in-depth understanding of how this model was generated, how to train your own model, I recommend the blog post that I have on that very thing. So let's go ahead and install these dependencies. This is going to take a little bit of time, so I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead. Okay, so I went ahead and installed all the dependencies, changed the directory, and also downloaded this code commenters models.zip file, which is basically the trained versions that I generated following the tutorial that I've written. And just uploaded. So these contain, we look here. So this contains different trained models based on whether or not it was the best BLEU score or best perplexity of the particular model or the last checkpoint of the trained model. We're going to be using the best BLEU since that sort of gives the best sort of results in terms of realistic looking summaries. So that downloaded everything. Now we're going to go ahead and load up the model. So this model is based off of a CodeBERT model that was developed and trained by Microsoft and uploaded to the awesome Hugging Face library, Transformer library. If you don't know about it, I highly recommend checking out Hugging Face's website and all their documentation that they have. They have a number of different libraries, the most popular being the Transformers library, because they give access to a bunch of different natural language processing models like the original BERT, as well as fine-tuned models from community members that train them for different languages and stuff. So they have wonderful documentation. I highly recommend them. So we're going to be using them to loading this model, as well as code from Microsoft's the people from the CodeBERT team to load up the model that was previously trained. So all this is doing is it's grabbing particular tokenizer configuration for the model, instantiating the encoder version of this model, and then outlining what the decoder version is, and finally putting that together into a sequence-to-sequence model, where we take the input as the method and the output being the code summary. And once we have that definition, we just load in back the trained model, and we're all good to go. So go ahead and run that. So this is going to download a couple things, such as the tokenizer config here. It's also going to download actual model weights for the encoder. And while that's running, I'll go ahead and walk you through how we actually prep the input into the model and decode the output of the model. So in order to do that, we basically take the method, we split it up using the tokenizer that we downloaded. So this is going to basically take the text, chunk it into pieces, and then convert those pieces into numbers that the machine understands. It will then feed those numbers in, which will be in an array or a tensor in this case, into the model here. So we take essentially just the converted numbers. So we're essentially taking the method and converting it into a number representation. And then we're feeding that into the model to get the model's predictions of what the summary is. And in that case, the model also is just generating a sequence of numbers. So we had to convert those back into their string representation, again using the tokenizer, where we're just decoding the numbers back into their original strings, and then we return the text. So at the end, what we get is we give it something, the string like this. What it will go is it will go through that process of converting that string into a sequence of numbers that represent the string, feeding it into the model, and then getting what the model's predicted in the numerical representation of that, converting that predicted numerical representation into back into a string representation, which for this is the main entry point, which makes sense since this is the main method. So now all we have to do is start up the FastAPI server and define a place where we can send a post request and get the method from the post request. So if you remember, in our post request, we had this data package here where we had the key being called code and then the actual code that the user highlighted. So essentially all this is doing is that we're saying that there's this class message. It's going to have this attribute code, so the key code. And we're saying that this post request address here is going to take in a message item. It's going to have a data attribute called code, which is going to have the method that the user highlighted. So we're going to take that message that the code that the user highlighted and send it off to this gen-comment function to generate the comment. Then we're going to set up ngrok to generate an IP address and all that fancy stuff for us. Generate a server using UV-Acorn and all that fancy stuff. So go ahead and run this. It went ahead and generated our public IP address. And now all we have to do is copy and paste that into this section of our axios.post method. So we should be, barring any issues, ready to go. So let's go ahead and reload our app and highlight this, hit the hello world, get a specific song. So it worked. There we go. So now we are able to highlight a piece of code, send it off to a server, have that server run the code through our commenting model, generate a comment, and then get that comment back and return it and print it to the screen. Next, what we're going to do is sort of finalize this tool by adding some additional little benefits where we basically write the comment back into the to the file. So let's go ahead and set that up. So in order to write back to the actual file, it's relatively simple. What we're going to do is check that the user hasn't closed the editor first off. So we're going to check if the editor exists. If so, we're going to edit the editor. So we're going to do editor.edit. We're going to use the edit builder. And we're going to pass it the function for how this edit builder is going to run. And what we're going to do is we're going to say edit builder.insert. So we're inserting into the editor at the selection start point. So this is basically where we're going to be inserting from. Essentially what this selection start is wherever the user ends their cursor on, or sorry, the top of the highlighted part. So even if they highlighted here, the start of the selection would still be this topmost highlighted portion. So it'd still be the if character. And so the selection.start basically telling the editor what line number and what column number that is. We're going to say that we want to insert at that location. We're going to say we want to insert. We're going to, right now, super simple. Since we're using Java, we're going to, since this is a comment, we're going to do // We're inserting a comment. And we're going to plus the response data. And we're going to add a new line as well, just so that the code that they have highlighted doesn't get commented as well. Let's go ahead and restart that and see how it goes. Awesome. Seeming to work pretty well. So now we're able to insert the comment that the model generated right above wherever the person highlighted. And what's awesome is that this also works for code snippets, so they don't have to just highlight an entire function. They could also highlight a code snippet like a for loop and get inline comments here. As you can see, it sort of messes up the formatting that the user has. So they might have to go in and, tab over and fix the formatting like this. If y'all know a better way of handling this like auto formatting, where we remember how far they were indented, please feel free to implement it yourself and comment down below how you went about that. So that pretty much sums it up for this tutorial. I know at the beginning you saw a bunch of extra things like automatically getting the at parameters and the return type and things like that. Those are all great, and I'm going to be sharing the source code so that you can review how I accomplished that. But it's not really necessary for this tutorial, and I think it's going to cause too much of a headache and make the tutorial go on way too long than it's necessary. So I'm going to drop a link to the GitHub repo that has all my source code for you to be able to review. I tried to comment it as best as I could and break it up into functions to make it as readable as I can. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, make sure to drop a like and a comment. If you don't, make sure to drop a dislike and put down in the comments what I could do better. Have a wonderful day.